Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patrick Eichler. I represent the director of Masaryk Democratic Academy. It is one of the organizations that invited you to this discussion.
My name is Patrick Eichler. I'm deputy director of the Masaryk Democratic Academy, which is one of the organizations which invited you for today's event about social and affordable housing. And I will start with short technical info. Ta technická informace je, že tlumočení té dnešní debaty najdete na obrazovce Zoomu, ve spodní části stránky vpravo, kde na ikonce globusu můžete přepnout mezi českým a anglickým tlumočením. The technical info is you can find interpretation for today's event. At the bottom of the Zoom screen on the right side, you can find the globe icon. And you can switch between the Czech and English channel for today's event. You can see the Czech interpretation on Facebook, and you can see the English interpretation and English version of today's event on YouTube. So this is the technical info. The opening remarks will be made by László Andor, the Secretary General of the FEPS Foundation. Úvodní poznámky řekne László Andor, generální tajemník Nadace pro evropská progresivní studia, která tu dnešní akci spolupořádá. László, máte slovo. László, floor is yours.
Dobrý večer. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm really happy to join this conference about social and affordable housing. As you know, FEPS, the Foundation for European Progressive Studies in Brussels, has been a proud supporter of a transnational project which produced the study that is going to be presented and discussed today. I'm glad several authors of the study are also present. And I have to say, sadly, that one of the authors, Milan Vtáčnik, unfortunately, in the meantime, passed away, and we remember his contribution with great fondness. The study itself looks like this under this title, the long title. We published it recently, altogether 146 pages. So those who are interested in many details of this policy field will find a lot to learn. Let me highlight that in addition to FEPS and Masaryk Academy, there were other important participants of this project. Fundación Pablo Iglesias in Spain, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung from Germany, and also Brivi Bas from Latvia have been with us. This is basically the FEPS method. As much as we can, we try to pool the interest of the progressive forces, progressive actors in Europe, and find what is common and what are the best possible examples in European policy, whether it's national, EU level, or municipal policies that can serve with good examples and help the social innovation in various contexts. Let me highlight that we had to innovate with this project what concerns the experience of FEPS itself, because for a very long time, housing and dealing with homelessness was not considered to be an EU matter. It was not considered to be part of the European Union agenda. But in the last 10 years, step by step, it was understood that this situation is not sustainable. With a European perspective, we also have to speak and, if possible, act on housing. First time it was part of the so-called social investment package in 2013, when a very informative document was produced about how to deal with homelessness. But more recently, the 2019 European Parliament elections hammered home this message that housing, whether you look at the international dimension, cross-border mobility, or otherwise is a major social question. And there are several dimensions of existing housing problems, but also there are several dimensions of the solution, of the action that can be taken. In the current circumstances, I would like to highlight two important fields where action is possible to improve housing conditions in Europe and tackle very severe problems of homelessness. One is the Recovery Fund, because against the Corona recession, the European Union adopted a new EU fund, and wherever governments integrate housing-related policies into the recovery strategy, this can now be funded within the national reconstruction plans by the European Union. But there is also a sustainability dimension, since the EU for about 2 years already has been working on a Green Deal. And actually it was the owner of this Green Deal, the champion of EU climate action, the Dutch Commissioner Frans Timmermans, who was also fighting to bring the question of housing to the European agenda. And through investment in sustainability, there should also be investment in solving the burning problems of homelessness and related shortages and distributional problems, because very often homelessness doesn't stem from an overall shortage, but a fundamental distributional problem. Now, without trying to be smarter than the authors of the study, I would like to conclude, and I would like to express my wish that in the coming period, we will follow up with many similar valuable projects with Masaryk Academy. We are aware of the great difficulties in the Czech Republic regarding the situation of social democracy at the current stage, but as much as possible, we will ensure that an improvement is possible, and the capacity to promote progressive ideas, progressive policies through a public debate, through publications like Listy. We will do our utmost to support the work which you are pursuing in your home environment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Velmi děkuji László Andorovi za jeho úvodní
Thank
poznámky.
you, László Andor, for your introductory remarks about housing policy and also about the perspectives of partnership between FEPS and Masaryk Democratic Academy and International and National Social Democrats. We are really honored and we will be happy to work with you. The Social Democrats lost the last elections and we will be happy to work with you. So those of you who are watching on Zoom, you can ask your questions and you can send us your remarks through the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of the screen. It says Q&A, so you can click on it and you can send us your questions or remarks. Those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can send your questions to chat and to the comment feed, and you can also send your questions on Facebook. We are live on the MDA and FEPS profile. So now we will discuss the study. It has already been shown to us by László Andor. We have Sergio Nazare Aznar and Nuria Lambea-Lop, one of the co-authors of this study. They will have a presentation about this study, and their presentation will have roughly 30 minutes. And then we will have a Q&A, and you can find links to the study on our Facebook. Professor, you have the floor.
So thank you very much. thank you very much for this kind of invitation to Prague somehow. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, we cannot organize this locally. That I think we can agree that is richer and is a more fluent discussion, and we can draw more interesting conclusions. But we will try to do our best. First of all, I want to thank you, FEPS, for pushing forward this study. This is a unique study because it is a bottom-up study. It starts looking for good practices in several European countries, and we have tried to identify the most relevant ones and took some conclusions from them. Let me also remember here Milan Facic, who passed away, as Laszlo was mentioning before. This was very sad, but he did a great job, an enormous job in this work, and I think this is a sort of remembrance of his work in this and of his commitment. In any case, thank you very much, and I introduce you my colleague, Dr. Nuriel Lambea, who will start with more general aspects and methodological aspects, and then I will cover the conclusions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know. Let's see. Okay, because I didn't see the presentation. Now I'm seeing it. Okay, so I'll start by introducing a bit the study. The study starts by delimiting the main concepts as here. As you can see, that guided this research, which are sometimes unclear or not easy concepts to define, as we will see later. So mainly, this research is guided by housing affordability concept, housing sustainability, and inclusiveness, apart from social housing, housing deprivation, and we also talk about homelessness, for example. So after this first chapter, we also introduce the most pressing housing challenges in the EU. And then in the second chapter, as Professor Nassarre said, we undertook these country studies in order to achieve a bottom-up approach. And to do so, we use objective criteria to choose the best practices and to highlight the lessons learned. So concerning the best practices, for example, we took into account aspects such as the budget, so the funding, the scope, the beneficiaries, the real impact, and the results of the best practices, among other parameters. And regarding the lessons learned, we pointed out strengths and weaknesses, and also the replicability of the measures and the policies. The country selections followed two criteria. First of all, the first one was its dimension, so bigger countries and smaller countries, and also the geographic location. So in that sense, we chose the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, England in particular, before the whole Brexit thing, and Austria representing the Nordic Western Europe countries, Spain representing the Mediterranean countries, and Slovakia, Latvia, and other Baltic countries for Eastern Europe. And the result, so here the third chapter, the result of the bottom-up approach is that here in this third chapter, we extracted lessons learned and we formulated multi-level policy recommendations or actionable points for the EU countries in relation to the main housing issues and challenges addressed. Then we have 10 recommendations for local and municipality level, 10 recommendations for regional and national level, and 10 for the EU level. You can all find it here in the final chapter of the report. So the final idea is what we try to explain here with this figure that Professor Nassarre and I drafted, is that all these recommendations should not be considered alone, but they require a coordinated policy at various levels, so local, regional, and national and international. Why? Because of the multidimensionality and the complexity of housing affordability and housing sustainability. As I said before, they are not easy to define. And for example, when talking about here we have in a more red color housing affordability, and then in a more green color, the housing sustainability. When talking about affordability, for example, all these inputs needs to be taken into account, which, as you can see, are distributed in different levels. So from more very household level to international level on the top. And so as you can see, it's much more than housing costs and housing standards. We see that the location of housing is important, for example, because then we can access to certain resources, employment, transport, different kind of facilities, services. They all play an important role in calculating expenditures and also in earning income and generating wealth to access and maintaining housing. Then also important to take into account the process of gentrification of certain neighborhoods, the existence of social housing, phenomenon of touristification, importance of land distribution at a more regional and national level, territorial cohesion, also labor, health, education regulations have impact on affordable housing, equality of opportunities, legal framework of housing tenures, and so on. These are all challenges or issues that we address on our study. At supranational level, for example, the financialization of housing by means of this wide access to mortgage loans, massive investment of international real estate companies, funds in buy-to-let properties, and so on. So all this must be taken into account when addressing housing affordability. And apart from housing affordability itself, we also need to take into consideration housing sustainability in 3 different dimensions: economic dimension, but also social dimension when regarding social participation and engagement, life quality and neighborhood livability, social inclusion, gender equality, no discrimination, among other parameters. And then also the environmental dimension of sustainability, that is to say housing construction and renovations, design, energy efficiency. Mr. Andor before talked about the Green Deal, which is important in this sense. So due to this complexity, strategies to tackle housing affordability require not only short-term, but also long-term strategies. And in these strategies, all stakeholders should be involved. That means public, private, for-profit, and private non-for-profit sectors. And that's what we try to show on this study as well. So in the following 2 slides, we have gathered all the best practices and lessons learned for each studied country. And here, Professor Nassarri will go a bit more into detail with some of them, and we will put them in relation to the main common challenges identified in the country studied. So I'm not going to take more time in this. You, of course, have it in the study. And then, so here we have in this next table, which you can find in the study, pages 120 to 127. This table summarizes all the common features and all the challenges of the housing sectors that we studied. And we classified them into 6 different areas. The first one is governance. Then we talk about urbanization and affordability. Then social rental housing, migrants and Roma, housing deprivation, and finally, homelessness. And among these different areas, the most commonly addressed topics by national reporters are 3. The first one is the impact of the process of urbanization, which together with the supply constraint by land scarcity and geographical restrictions, also lack of territorial cohesion, we mentioned it before as well, lack of social and affordable housing and processes of gentrification of cities and touristification, these all contributed to housing unaffordability in major urban areas in all studied countries. So housing unaffordability due to this process of urbanization is an issue, let's say a housing issue, and highlighted by all the studied countries. Then the second big field addressed by nearly all studied countries is social rental housing. Social rental housing in two different approaches. The first one is the need for renovations. The first one is the size of its share, if it's too big or if it's too small. And the second one is its management or mismanagement. And then the third big challenge addressed is housing deprivation in terms of lack of adequacy of housing in different fields. So here we talk about the need for renovation of the stock, the improvement of energy efficiency, and also the universally accessible housing and independent living, the need for this universally accessibility, mainly for disabled and also for aging people. Of course, other issues mentioned that are also very important are housing governance in terms of lack of coherence in housing policies and also insufficient data and research in relation to housing. Then also migration, immigration, refugees and Roma people, housing insecurity as well. And finally, homelessness. Homelessness in its different form, roofless people, hidden homelessness, which is a big issue, squatting, among others. So homelessness precisely, and as it has been mentioned already, is a problem that is on the rise in nearly every European country. So now I'm giving the floor to Professor Nassarre, who will elaborate further on these challenges as well as the lessons learned and the recommendations. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Nuria. So far, now, I mean, here in this presentation, but also while we were doing the report, we learned that there are no magic solutions to the housing problem. In fact, there are many colleagues here attending to this meeting today, like Shortchams and some others that we regularly meet in international events. And there is nobody that raises the hand and says, okay, I have solved the housing problem in my country, or I have solved the housing problems in my city. No, there is nobody. Yes, there are good practices that are working, but also and then we wanted to catch them and to organize them here together in this report. But also we wanted to be very realistic and say, okay, there is no magic solution, but there are good practices. But these good practices have costs, have drawbacks, needs an investment, and things like that. So there are no magical solutions, and good things don't happen by chance. So if you check the report, the first half of the report, you can easily find many charts like this one, including all this kind of information that Nuria has reported, saying, okay, advantages and disadvantages, drawbacks, investment needs, problems found, reactions of people, of beneficiaries, reaction of policymakers, and people, overall people benefited from the measure, relationship between investment and beneficiaries, and these kind of things. So when we try to find out which were the best practices in relation to housing in these given countries, we wanted to be very realistic. And like Nuria was mentioning, we found out that there are items, there are sections that were mentioned by every reporter in every country, starting with urbanization. We have addressed this issue of urbanization, and we understand it as a process that has a clear impact in housing and affordability, the lack of territorial cohesion, that creates geographical land constrictions, and that creates cities gentrification and touristification. So the idea of policies in many European countries in the last decades in concentrating the opportunities, labor opportunities, job opportunities, especially for the young people, just in cities, just in given cities, big-sized cities and middle-sized cities sometimes has had the undesired outcome of unaffordability of housing. And as we have already seen in that chart that Nuria showed us, affordability of housing is a very complex problem. So how this problem has been addressed in the given countries, which are the good practices in relation to consequences of an unaffordability due to a process of urbanization, that is the concentration of opportunities in cities. So inviting people to live in cities and not allowing them to stay in their little towns or villages because there is nothing to do. So basically in Spain and also in the United Kingdom, but also in the Netherlands, they have progressed towards the creation of different functional types of housing tenures. So all these reporters pointed out that it's not a good policy to focus just in one type of housing tenure, either home ownership or tenancies. Because if you do that, you will create bubbles like the one in 2007, related to mortgages and the global financial crisis and the widespread, the unregulated and unlimited widespread of home ownership to everybody, even to those that cannot afford paying back the mortgages. And we are still suffering the consequences of that crisis in many countries after 15 years. But also there are countries that have reported bubbles in relation to tenancies. So if you don't allow people to buy properties, like happens in the Netherlands, for example, or in Belgium, so or in Baltic countries, in Latvia, we have found it out. Then you have a problem with tenancies, and means that there is a bubble in tenancies, and also you have so many people depending on landlords. Then you need to change the legislation to make tenancies appropriate, and things like that. For example, a clear case of a situation in which we have that there are too many tenants and so few landlords is Switzerland. That is not covered in the report, but we know that 65% of population in Switzerland are tenants of 6 landlords, 6 big companies that own the land and own the housing in Switzerland. So this is also an undesired situation. Austria and the Netherlands have also tackled this problem of affordability and urbanization through rent control, but only for public housing, or a point system of awarding properties. And also these two countries, so the Netherlands and the United Kingdom, through the creation of mixed communities. This is the mixité, thus avoiding the stigmatization and ghettoization of neighborhoods. The details on how they have done this can be found in the report. Also, the intervention of the public administration in relation to urbanization has been pointed out by reporters. And in the United Kingdom, said this intervention. So this we have ranked this intervention by the public administration into the housing market from soft or less intrusive mechanisms to those mechanisms that are more intrusive. So starting with the United Kingdom, the creation or the encouragement of the creation of housing associations have been pointed out as a good practice, because this creation of public-private partnerships, so the collaboration with the private sector, has revealed to be a good thing for making housing more affordable in cities. In Austria, there are soft government loans also to housing associations, and to create more subsidized housing. In Slovakia, we have this state housing development fund, which are soft long-term loans that are mostly used for housing maintenance. More than 60% of the housing stock in Slovakia has been refurbished, has been properly maintained thanks to these public funds. In Austria as well, in Vienna in particular, these are this smart flats scheme in Vienna, with a higher share that has fulfilled a goal, which is a higher share of public subsidies per square meter in exchange of smaller dwellings of 65 square meters. And finally, in Latvia, there is a housing guarantee program for families to become homeowners. So there is a need there to increase the share of home ownership, and they do this through this housing guarantee program. There's a public backing of the whole scheme. In relation to territorial cohesion and planning, the Netherlands has pointed out this mechanism called Woningnet that is successful in bypassing in going further and to improving this waiting list system that exists for every public housing and social housing scheme. So usually in many countries, waiting lists for public housing and social housing are local, which means that municipalities take care of the provision of social housing, and there are waiting lists of thousands of people waiting there. So this Woningnet system is a web-based system mechanism by which people of any municipality can search available housing, social housing stock in different municipalities, not only in theirs, but also in others. This is good for mobility. This is also for encouraging finding job opportunities in different municipalities, because it is usually the case that social tenants don't want to move, because if they move to another municipality, they lose the possibility of getting or continuing in a social housing scheme. So they have been successful in doing so through this supra-municipal mechanism. The United Kingdom has approached this territorial cohesion and planning through Section 106 of English Town and Country Planning Act 1990, which is the reserve, is zoning, is reserving a share of all developments for social housing. So it's compulsory for any developer to save a share of any development for social housing. This is also the case in Spain, for example, and also they have moved towards this public-private partnership scheme. And finally, in Vienna, they have come up with this land use category of subsidized housing, which is similar to the English system. And since 2019, 2/3 must be subsidized housing. Any housing that is developed should be subsidized. Let me follow this. So, second hot topic in our report is social rent housing. Basically, first is the size of its share. So is it too low? How can we increase that? And also the second approach is the mismanagement of or misuse of the existing stock. So one thing is how to increase the share of social housing. Second is how to optimize the use of current social housing stock. Yes. So how has this been addressed in the studied countries? In Spain and in Austria, two completely different situations have agreed that the role of housing associations like organization to increase the share of social housing is crucial. It is a reality, especially since the global financial crisis of 2007, that public administrations themselves don't have the resources, don't have the possibilities, the capabilities to develop by themselves a big housing stock, social housing stock for everyone. So they have to come up with agreements with private stakeholders, and this housing associations approach has been revealed as an optimal one. In relation to Slovakia, they have go for these municipal rental housing dwellings, and we have focused in this project in Nové Mesto, not Bahom city, which is covered in depth in the study, and you can go through it and check how they have done this just with public resources. And also, as I said, it is this social housing stock is not only related to increasing social housing stock, but also properly managing the existing one. And how is this done in countries like in Austria, or in Vienna, in cities like in Vienna, where they have such an amount of social housing? Well, again, you see here these housing associations and the umbrella organizations take care of a proper and optimal management of social housing. In the United Kingdom, they are doing this through cross-subsidiation, which means allowing housing associations in the United Kingdom to engage in private businesses, not in the same extent as in the Netherlands, as they had a very bad experience in the past. But they are able to engage in private businesses with a profit, so they can reinvest this profit into social housing. So this is a way of funding social housing different and independent from public subsidies. And also they have this transparency rules through regulatory judgments of registered providers. This allows this housing association in England not to fall in the same mistakes like the ones in the Netherlands in the past. And also in the United Kingdom and in the Netherlands, they are tackling this problem of skewness somehow. There is a discussion whether it is convenient that social tenants remain in social tenancies forever or not. Also, if it is positive that to allow social tenants to remain in social housing, in social rental housing forever. In our perspective, this is not a good approach because this leads to permanent dependency of people, of vulnerable people, on charity by the state, saying, okay, give me social rental housing forever, paying just £25 or £50 for the rest of my life, so I don't need to work, I don't need to follow any program of reintegration in society, and so on and so forth. This is not a good approach. It also creates long waiting lists and no renovation, no rotation of the existing housing stock. So offering flats far below price means that the demand never ends and increases every day. Yes, and it is absolutely impossible to cover it ever. So we approach it. These two countries have reported saying, well, we are tackling this. We don't want people to be dependent on public subsidies and public housing forever, and we try to make rotation more often, to more possible. Yes. In relation to housing deprivation, this is related, of course, of lack of quality of housing in 3 different fields: universal accessibility to housing in an aging society and for the disabled people, renovation of certain housing stock, and improvement of energy efficiency. There are some projects mentioned in the report, like this Energy Sprong project in the Netherlands, which is an energy and renovation works paid by future energy cost savings. This is a quite interesting scheme. Nuria knows the details also in the report. They can be found in the report. In Slovakia, they have this State Housing Development Fund. As said before, 65% of multi-family residential buildings have been refurbished thanks to this scheme. This is public money scheme. In Austria, we have this the requirements of increased energy standards in new constructions and refurbishment of social housing. Creating new social housing doesn't mean that it doesn't fulfill energy standards. And finally, also in Latvia, we have some examples there. All in all, these are the lessons learned from what we have studied in these more than 150 pages. First, there is the need to achieve a functional mix of housing tenures. As Laszlo was mentioning at the beginning, there is always a reluctancy by the European Commission to take action in relation to housing, because it is commonly understood it is not a European Union competence. But we have an additional instrument to the two that have been mentioned by Laszlo, which is the informal harmonization. Informal harmonization means that we can learn good practices from one to each other, and we can copy paste them. Yeah. There are functional tenancies. There are functional tenures in different countries that can be a source of inspiration for our own countries. For example, there are countries in Europe that have functional tenancies, that have leases that work properly, yes, that have found a balance between the interests of landlords and tenants. Tenants are seeking for affordability, stability, and flexibility, and landlords are looking for profitability and safety. And there are countries that have reached a real balance between the two interests, between the two parties, and they have functional tenancies markets. So they can be a source of inspiration to all of us. Some examples are given in the report, but also I invite you to check, if you're interested, particularly interested in this field, to check the 10 Law project. It's called 10 Law, it's TENLAW, 10 Law project, where this was led by Professor Schmidt in Germany, that covered 30 something jurisdictions and find out which are the jurisdictions that work better in this field and why. There are also intermediate tenures in other jurisdictions. There are in many countries, there are tenures that are not necessarily only home ownership or leases. There are countries that have different types of housing tenures and they work. Like, for example, the shared ownership or the temporal ownership. They exist in the United Kingdom, they exist in the Netherlands, they exist in Spain, partially in Spain, in Catalonia, in our region, and they can be exported to any other jurisdictions that are interested in not forcing people to choose between just between full home ownership and tenancies. There are other options. This is called the continuum of tenures. So a wide range of tenures from which people can choose according to their needs, according to their expectations, according to their social and economic capabilities. Yes. Also, the community land trusts are quite interesting in Belgium, or functional housing cooperatives. It's difficult to find good examples of well-functioning housing cooperatives, but there are some examples European-wide. Why not? They should be a source of inspiration for our countries as well. Second lesson learned is the widespread of housing association-like institutions. As I mentioned before, housing associations have been successful in combining public policies and private well-managing of housing stock. Yes, they have a strong public monitoring, but at the same time, they want to be as much professional as possible. So they avoid, in managing their housing stock, they are successfully avoiding skewness and all the problems I've mentioned before. Third thing is that urbanization has led to population concentration, suitable land scarcity, housing affordability, housing deterioration, and displacement of the less affluent. Big intervention of public-backed funds, like in Slovakia, or social housing in Vienna, and a proper policy of territorial cohesion is needed. Territorial cohesion means generating opportunities in all size villages and municipalities. Yeah? This means that people don't necessarily need to move to big cities to create a future, to get a job. Yes. This has been a crucial issue, for example, in a prospective exercise that has been done by the Spanish president in 2021. I took part in it. It's called Spain 2050. And there are 3 or 4 countries. I am not sure whether the Czech Republic was involved in that, but there are 3 or 4 countries in Europe that have done this exercise of Prospective 2050. And there is a whole chapter dedicated to this territorial cohesion problem. So if you concentrate population just in big cities and opportunities you follow this Richard Florida thing of creative cities and so on and so forth, you will get in exchange a housing problem. Yes. So there is a need for increasing the opportunities in the countryside, in other places. Fourth thing is the guarantee universal accessibility to housing of the elderly and the disabled. Housing, state of repair, and energy efficiency are essential. Well, this is easy to say, but it's difficult to do, and it's expensive. Laszlo was mentioning this Green Deal thing, or the cohesion funds, or the regeneration funds, due to COVID-19. I tell you what's going to be done in Spain. This Green Deal thing is focused mainly in this environmental policy of the European Union. Laszlo mentioned that. But in a country like Spain, but also like Italy, but also like Portugal, but also like Greece, Malta, and I fear that the Czech Republic, because of Prague and many ancient cities you have there, and a nice housing heritage or building heritage, historical heritage you have in your old towns and so on and so forth. Sometimes there is a feeling that there is not much need for these energy efficiency things, and there is an increasing need for refurbishing the housing stock. Just putting, for example, lifts, elevators, or just refurbishing the facades, not the balcony to fall down because they are too ancient, they are too old. Yes, so I am not sure. I mean, whether these Green Deal funds are really good focus for our countries, where we have old cities, we have an old housing stock, and we need money for other things or more urgent things than just environmental and energy improvements. And these days, there's a big discussion in Spain among architects, among geographers and so on, what to do with this Green Deal money. So we have so urgent needs for accessibility, universal accessibility for disabled, for the aging population, balconies falling down, facades that are really falling down as well in all city centers and things like that. That they are trying to combine both things and say, okay, while we are improving the energy in these multi-unit buildings or in this on these houses and so on, at the same time we are increasing accessibility. We are helping people to get into their houses better. We are preventing balconies from falling down and so on and so forth. So yeah, they are trying to cheat a bit to the European Union, saying, okay, it's good to have more energy efficiency buildings, but we have more urgent needs in our housing stock. So this is just a recommendation out of the record. I mean, I hope this is not being saved, and I don't want to create problems to Spanish authorities with the Green Deal. But this is a recommendation. I mean, problems in our housing stock and in countries like Spain or yours with this ancient housing stock are so important. Fifth conclusion is patching the laws. Incoherent or contradictory multi-level housing legislation does not work. This is an important thing, especially for big countries or middle-sized countries. When you have multi-level legislation, you have legislation from the European Commission about energy things, for example, or for consumer things. And then you have legislation from the state, from the country, and you have legislation from the regions, and also you have the legislation from the municipalities. You have these multi-level policies, multi-level pieces of legislation that sometimes are contradictory, don't match. So there's an important thing to find a coherent system, a coherent framework of housing policies. This is not easy. Again, it's easy to say, but it's complicated to be done. But effort should be done, should be invested in this, because otherwise it's very difficult to do anything. And I tell you an example in Spain. For the first time in 45 years, we will have our housing law. So the first housing law in Spain will be approved, will be passed next year after 45 years without any. So all housing policy has been done from the regions, but the money came from the state, and the municipalities put the legislation of the regions in practice. So this has been a mess for the last 45 years. So it is not by chance that we are in this bad situation today, due to the global financial crisis and so on and so forth. There has not been a coherent framework of housing policies. So I am not sure whether the Czech Republic there is a good framework of housing policy. You have a housing law for the whole country, and then if it is coherent with European Union policies and on objectives, and also is coherent with the municipalities' competencies. This is an important thing to do if you don't have if it is not a reality still yet in your country. A sixth one, you need a trustworthy and independent housing research that can help to properly orientate housing policies. There are, our institute is one of these, but there are so few institutes that really try to co-opt housing studies from an academic perspective. You need objective data, you need objective research to do proper policies. It's not a good advice to follow lobbies, for example, lobbies from one side or the other side. Of course, the developers come to you, banks come to you, say, oh, everybody needs mortgages. So grant mortgages to everybody as soon as possible. And then there is another lobby, this is the tenants association, saying, no. We need rent control. Rent control is a magical tool, it works everywhere. No, it's false, it's also false. Both things are false. But if you follow the rules of lobbies, then you are doomed. Yes, that's what has happened in Spain and in many other countries for years. So because this lack or scarcity of these independent institutes that provide independent data, both economic, so with numbers, but also with social. Laszlo was mentioning this is a social exercise. Yeah, so yeah, a honest approach to social housing and to social housing policies is essential. And the final one is that to increase the literacy in the field of housing among citizens. You would be astonished of how many people are illiterate in relation to housing. They don't know the rights they have. They don't know the funding or the financing possibilities they have. They have not the chance sometimes to access to subsidies. They don't understand the rules. Even if they live there in condominiums or in multi-unit buildings, they don't know the rules. It is essential to transfer and communicate trustworthy housing research to groups of interest and to people and citizens in general. This is easy to say, but it's hard to do. But I think if you have to invest your time and maybe your budget in housing policies, our advice would be to follow these seven approaches, 7 rules. Of course, now there are many things. There are many other things, but I think I am out of time. You can see the recommendations for local authorities in the report. These are the ones for the local authorities. You can also find the recommendations for the regions or for the country in this other, also in the report, and also for the European Union. I have tried to sum them up in this light octopus, this last octopus I showed you, and I think I have covered most of the topics. So thank you very much for your time. I'm ready for your questions and the discussion afterwards.
Děkuju moc Sergiu Nassar Aznarovi a
Thank you, Sergio Nassar Aznar and Nuria Lambealo. Thank you very much. And now I will introduce all our panelists. And I will ask 2 questions. First of all, what is the biggest issue in housing policy that you identify from your point of view, whether it is a political point of view or non-governmental point of view or your point of view from the academia? And what of these recommendations that are in the study or that you heard during the presentation could be useful to solve the issue that you have identified as the most pressing? So I think that it would be nice to start with Jan Klusáček. He's an analyst of the Zabydlení initiative, so he represents a non-governmental organization. And then we will move on to Sorcha Edwards, to her international point of view. She's the Secretary General of Housing Europe. And then we will look into the academia. We have Tomáš Hoření Samec, a sociologist of the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences. And then we are a political institute, so we are interested in the application of recommendations, how to apply these in politics. So then I will ask Lucie Štaselová. She's an expert on housing and she's a former deputy mayor of the capital of Slovakia, Bratislava. And then we have also Petr Dolínek, an expert on housing. He's a former MP representing Prague, the capital of the Czech Republic. So what's next? I will ask you to answer my questions. And first, I'll give the floor to Jan Klusáček. You have 5 minutes. Good evening. Thank you for giving me the floor first. I will try to stick to 5 minutes. So what is the biggest issue? It's lack of housing, or maybe not enough housing, and housing deprivation. This is what was mentioned in the study. So this is the biggest issue. It has a huge impact on people who don't have housing. And I think that on a long-term basis, a solution would be various social real estate agencies or guaranteed housing, which means that there are various guarantees given to landlords, and we trying to respond to the needs of landlords. So this is already part of some projects that are happening here in the Czech Republic, and I think that's great that this also exists abroad. So I've been quite quick. So let me address another issue. That's the number of households that are affected. Some households suffer from excessive costs of housing. Over 500,000 of households invest over 40% of their income into housing. So I like that the study speaks about the elderly and their situation. Energy efficiency has also been mentioned. This affects not only the environment, but also the costs. And over half of those households who are affected are households of the elderly. Obviously, we've heard that this is a complex issue, and we've heard that not only municipalities can build social housing, but also housing associations. So this is a good recommendation. But there was something that was missing in the study. In case of the elderly, they can, for example, get allowances, housing allowances. And I've seen this many times before. There are many recommendations and obviously many solutions, many points. And maybe this is in the study itself, but it was not mentioned in the presentation that a group of people, the elderly, can use housing allowances, and many seniors here in the Czech Republic don't use these allowances, even though this could improve their situation. So this is just one remark concerning the presentation, but thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Jan Klusáček. And now I'd like to give the floor to Sorcha Edwards. Is it possible? You have the floor. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, and it's been a very useful, informative discussion. As you know, Housing Europe works at European level to have better regulation, financing, and information around housing. So we very welcome all the contributions to that ongoing conversation that we have with European institutions. I think that Sergio has hit on a few important points there in his conclusions. And I'd like to maybe hit on one of them. So he mentioned the issue around in a way, a failure of public policy that he mentioned in Spain. So he said 45 years it has been a mess. So because of this decentralization of policymaking around housing. And I think this is an issue that we really have to look at, because it's not only in Spain, I think in many of the member states of the EU, we've seen too much of a withdrawal of policymakers from housing. And I think this is why public policy, when it comes to housing, has just not kept pace with the reality. I mean, even if I think of, let's just think of so the big platforms that we're now trying to deal with, you know, the Facebook of this world, the Airbnb of this world, and we see that public policy are actually way behind them in working on the interests of people. Well, I would say actually we're in the same situation when it comes to housing, and I think Sergio is right about that. Public policy has not kept up with what society needs when it comes to housing. And that's why, as he mentioned, we have this problem between people's income and the amount of money they're spending on housing, because public policy has not protected the society in the face of the different factors that are producing those differences in costs. He mentioned the energy problem, another issue. So most of our housing was built at a time when there were no issues around using fossil fuels. Well, those times have changed. We have to stop using fossil fuels. We have to go into a post-fossil fuel era. Public policy, again, has not kept up with this change. Now we are playing catch up because we have too many homes that are putting citizens in situations of fuel poverty, or they're too cold or they're too hot. Again, a public policy failure. When it comes, Sergio also mentioned the issue around shrinking, so concentration of citizens in urban areas, shrinking villages, shrinking smaller towns. Again, we have not moved on the mobility front to see what interventions can be made to stop this from happening, interventions to improve services in those smaller towns to stop this from happening. You also mentioned, Sergio, the under-occupancy, so the need for right-sizing. It's again an issue that has been brewing for many decades. So the fact that you have overcrowding, but at the same time you have large proportion of our built environment that is under-occupied. And it's something, again, that with good policy can be avoided. So I think this is, we're playing catch up here. We have to look at those. I think the policy of Housing Europe is to really zoom in on those projects that are actually doing what we need to do. So those projects that combine the human approach, that are economically sustainable and that are environmentally sustainable. So find those examples that are tackling this clash between the environment and social interest, the ones that are combining all of those goals. So we see, despite the big picture, we see a lot of good examples coming from the social housing providers, the housing associations that are managing to combine those. And Sergio have highlighted a few. We also gather them on our websites. We have to look at those examples that are tackling shrinking cities successfully. We have to look at those examples that are looking at right-sizing, so helping people to voluntarily move from homes that are too large for them into smaller homes where they can have care, where they're near services for their aging for the years when they are, they can't take care of themselves. So this is what we are very busy doing, looking at those examples that have kept up with public needs. And then it's really up to policymakers to make sure we have the right regulatory framework to replicate those, so that our housing policies are fit for purpose and fit for the present and of course the future. So thanks a lot for adding to this conversation, Sergio and Nuria. We need as many people to be engaged on this as possible, because I think it really is time to think differently and do differently when it comes to this whole housing issue. Thanks.
Děkuji moc, Sorcha Edwards.
Thank you, Sorcha Edwards. I have noted the politicians have withdrawn from housing policy, and you told us about 45 years of chaos in Spanish housing policy. In the Czech Republic, there is no housing law. The Czech Social Democrats have not been able to enact housing policy, but Czech politicians at the beginning of the 1990s, when the economic transformation was conducted, the right-wing politicians sold out a majority of the housing stock, making impossible for their successors to implement any housing policy. So I don't want to tar all politicians with the same brush, but you said that you need to have also value-oriented policies. This is something what I have noted down as an interesting motto. We are a political foundation, but now let me ask Tomáš Hoření-Samec, a sociologist of the Czech Academy of Sciences, to share his view with us. Thank you, good evening, thank you for the invitation. Let me be brief. The questions that have been asked are very comprehensive, but let me repeat what the other speakers have already said. The major issue I see in the Czech context is the fact that the housing system in the Czech Republic currently relies too much on privately owned housing, and the public sector plays a minor role. And this is relevant to the structure of the housing stock, but also to public debate, to the way people relate to housing issues. And the housing is very much individualized and very much relies on market-based solutions. In the context of housing being more and more an investment, and real estate being more or less speculative investment opportunities, our problem is quite intense because, first, there's a lack of real existing housing stock available to municipalities, regions, or the government. And second, there is no infrastructure for implementing those policies. This has been said at the very beginning of the presentation, that the coordination of all the levels plays an essential role for the housing policies to be designed, implemented, so that these policies really reflect the necessities of all stakeholders, not only of the final users of housing, but also for the necessities of the municipalities. What I see as hope is that we see a reverse tendency, that housing affordability or unaffordability becomes a national topic, number one. Municipalities seek to promote housing, to look at social housing, and to apply principles housing first, and also look at the middle class. In one project funded by the Technological Agency of the Czech Republic, we are trying to cooperate with individual municipalities. And we can see the participation of various stakeholders within one municipality or within several departments of the local authority is very complicated because there is a lack of legislative framework enabling to promote participative housing, meaning the intermediate 10 years. And this is a long run. At the same time, the housing emergency impacts low-income households and disadvantaged groups very strongly, but also the middle class as well. And in the mid-run, because it is a structural problem, it is essential that we start solving it. The earlier the better, and the solution must be comprehensive. That is why I want to appreciate and acknowledge the multi-level approach of the authors of the study. This is essential. This is essential for the Czech context to improve the situation. And last thing I want to emphasize is that we need to think in the international context, to abandon the Czech view purely. That is also very important. And thank you for your attention. Thank you. Thank you. This is one of the things we are trying to bring insights from abroad. And now Lucia Stasilová, a former vice mayor of Bratislava. Housing policy was within your remit. What is your experience from the capital of Slovakia? What are the limits of Bratislava? What were you able to change? It's up to you. So you need to turn on your microphone. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me praise the report that is available to us. Milan Vtáčnik has presented the report. I had the chance to meet him when I was in office, and we discussed the rental housing with him very actively. And in Slovakia, there are some models that show we are able to tackle lack of affordable housing. Nové Mesto nad Váhom has some advantages, but also drawbacks. And this demonstrates what the obstacles are that we have identified. Nové Mesto nad Váhom is a mid-sized town in Slovakia. I met the mayor of the town. It started building affordable housing 25 years ago. We can see that there is some history. The mayor told me personally, when I was asking him what is the miracle or the magic key to building affordable housing. So the first criterion is continuity. This is what he said, and this is an answer that comes to my mind when it comes to Spain. Second, the second answer I got from him, what was changed, Nové Mesto nad Váhom was able to make an arrangement with the government. The government sold the land for €1 per square meter. And this is one of the issues we are facing today, that the towns do not have enough land to develop new housing facilities. When we looked at the development of affordable housing, not only to disadvantaged groups, but also to a usual citizen of Bratislava, the middle class is no longer able to buy their own housing properties. So we looked at the supply and demand sides of housing. So it's no longer possible for them to buy their own flats. And then what we looked at as well is the proportion between the housing, or what is the legal relationship, the ownership prevails, but there are only 0.85% of municipal flats compared to Brno, a town in Moravia. There are 15%, and in some towns there are 25% of municipal flats owned by the municipality, so to speak. Except for that, there were some things that were stagnating, but Slovakia has this state housing development fund, but the terms and conditions for using the funds were Bratislava, the costs are the highest in Slovakia, and you cannot use a single euro from this fund in Bratislava. After this election, and let me say that what we need to do in order to really start acting, we need to take a systematic approach, and that is why we have designed this policy of urban housing strategy. This is a long-term plan until 2030, adopted by the city of Bratislava, including a plan to implement those policies and to tackle the issues at hand, and also procedures defined to achieve the goals. So in a way, I summed up the major issues, and there is a certain hope that we have been able to design a strategic document that was declared one of the 4 or 5 top policies at the European Housing Forum several weeks ago.
Thank you, Lucia Štaselová. And now I'd like to give the floor to Petr Dolínek. You are a former social democratic MP, and you've also submitted 2 laws on housing. So maybe you could speak about that, but I have a similar question for you, or the same question like for the others. So what are the biggest housing issues, and do you think that there are some recommendations in the study that could be useful in the Czech Republic? Good evening. I'd like to thank the Foundation for European Progressive Studies for the nice words at the beginning. Thank you for the support of Social Democratic Party in the Czech Republic. Thank you for the offer of help, and we will keep benefiting from your help. Thank you very much. And before answering your question, I'd like to go back to what has just been mentioned, an example of how housing policy has not been properly addressed. And since the very beginning, it started 25 years ago. Let me give you some figures. There is 1.3 million inhabitants in Prague, and the city owns 8,000 flats, and various districts own 24,000 flats, which is too much. But the city of Bohumín, which is governed by Social Democrats, the city has 21,000 inhabitants, and the municipality owns 4,000 flats, and they are regulating rent in the whole city because they have very powerful tools and they can modify the rent on the municipal level. So I'm just giving you this example because I wanted to illustrate that it's about responsibility, but the politicians are ready to take on the responsibility, and it's up to them. They should not leave public property to private entities. And concerning those laws, we've submitted a law on affordable housing, and this is connected to the study, and the law was about public profit organizations. We wanted to establish these organizations that would focus on affordable housing, and these organizations would be governed by strict rules, but at the same time, municipalities could be involved in these organizations to make housing policy interesting for investors, banks, municipalities, and tenants. And there was even wider scope. We wanted to propose rental housing, but also private ownership housing. We wanted to allow people to get housing without becoming indebted because of mortgages. So, for example, one of our proposals was for the municipality to have up to 25% of flats on its territory in its ownership. And then legal entities who would invest in housing could deduct the investment from their taxes. And also subsidies for investors were limited to 10%. So we wanted it to be transparent and clear. We wanted this law to be interesting for everyone, and all the measures in it to be interesting to everyone. And at the same time, we wanted regions to monitor the whole situation. And we also wanted to provide affordable housing to those who wanted to live in rental housing. Again, we wanted them to have the opportunity to claim or to include rent in their tax returns. And at the same time, we were proposing legislation, stricter measures or rules for Airbnb. For example, limit those short-term rentals to 30 days a year. We wanted these flats to be available on the market, but we were confronted with political unwillingness, and municipalities were unable to work with us when they were not willing to work with us. We first wanted to provide quality legislation and then allow municipalities to build their own rules, but they all decided to just walk their own path. But based on low quality legislation. And then we were confronted with public administration, with government lawyers. They were telling us that we were trying to include in the law something which did not belong there. And they were telling us that we were trying to influence housing policy in a wrong way. So these studies are very good because these studies show that some tools that we think are not in line with our legislation are standard tools elsewhere in other countries. I think that some countries in Eastern Europe focus too much on private ownership and forget about public housing. So this is my conclusion, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you, Petr Dolínek. So second round of short questions for all our panelists, and then I will give the floor to Mr. Nasare Aznar and Mrs. Lambert to conclude today's debate. So I have a question for Lucia Štaselová. Can you tell us a bit more about the action plan that you've mentioned? And did you find the proposals that he mentioned interesting? It's really interesting that we are striving to change legislation in both countries. We have the State Housing Development Fund here in Slovakia. This fund is focusing on urban locations, and it's not focusing on excluded communities, for example, the Roma community. So we have still a lot of work to do, and I think that your proposals are quite interesting, so we will stay in touch. And in terms of our policy and strategy within our legislative framework, we've identified the possibilities to renovate existing housing. We worked with state organizations. We asked them whether it was possible to own or transfer these buildings into our ownership. We also decided that the city would become a developer, even though there is not enough land. But where it's possible, we are trying to change land use and zoning. But we are confronted with the resistance of local inhabitants. But I think this is normal. This happens in all urban areas. People who live there are against everything. So we had to develop participation mechanisms and communication mechanisms to speak to local inhabitants. That was third action. Then we had various legal assessments done to be able to work directly with developers. And we used their power and their setup because and part of private development will be dedicated to social housing. And last but not least, we are also talking to financial institutions who are planning to support long-term projects. And here we have been discussing this topic with banks and insurance companies. So these are 4 actions that we are currently conducting. But at the same time, we are lobbying to change the calculation of subsidies that come from the State Housing Development Fund and are used in Bratislava. We are also trying to change the law which regulates rent in subsidized flats, because we are unable to maintain affordable rent in these flats, but it's important that our strategy has been adopted by Bratislava as a binding document. So even after the elections, it will remain binding, and the new representatives of Bratislava will be obliged to pursue our efforts. There are roughly 500 families in Bratislava who live in restitute dwellings, and they are unable to move, and they have regulated rent, and we have to subsidize their rent, and it costs us a lot of money. So we are trying to provide municipal rental housing, and we currently have 9 large projects building rental housing. Thank you very much. And I think a visit of Bratislava is recommended. So it's a nice city as well. So I have a question for Sorcha Edwards. Mr. Dolinek said that various levels of state administration don't cooperate, but do you have good examples or examples of good cooperations among various levels of state administration, municipal, national administration?
So yes, this is, I think, one of the enemies of continuity, because I think it was pointed out by one of the experts here today that when it comes to housing policy, we need continuity. And the 4-year political cycle in this respect is no friend of housing, particularly when it becomes too strongly ideological. Because I think the trick to good housing policy is to focus on good outcomes for society, as I said earlier. So indeed, this lack of collaboration between different levels of policy making, and especially between different political parties, is really a problem when it comes to housing policy. So when you ask me for good examples, it is really where we manage to move housing policy in a way as far away from politics as possible, and where we manage to have cross-party agreement and cross-party support for a clever housing policy with good use of public funding and with good outcomes for people. I mean, I will think of 2 good examples. Obviously, I think, as Sergio said earlier on, nobody is saying there is a perfect housing system. This is not all figured out. Housing is something that needs to constantly adapt to changing needs, and there is no perfect solution. However, there is definitely, we see an excellent example in Austria. We see this continuity of the limited profit housing cooperatives, very carefully monitored and audited by the public sphere. And we see a constant output of new homes, very high standard of renovation, and future oriented. So looking to what is going to be needed in terms of climate adaptation. So there I have to say that Austria, your neighbor, not far from Bratislava, is an example of where we see good collaboration cross parties and between political levels. I have to say also the Netherlands is a good example. If we look at the commitment to get off gas, so this resulted in an agreement between the government and the housing providers, which have 30% of the housing, the non-profit housing providers, and the tenants union. to work together to get off gas in a way that wouldn't put more burden on people living in the homes. Another excellent example of political collaboration and joint working towards a common goal. Again, not saying we can all find flaws with the systems, but there are two examples that jump out. Finland also works well with their National Housing Fund and their commitment to good quality across all tenures. And I know they've also had a commitment to drop the very strong commitment to cut their homelessness numbers, which for a Scandinavian country got very high in the 80s. But they did have a joint commitment to bring down the number of homeless people, working with local authorities, working with social housing providers. So I think there are good examples of multi-level governance that come up with solutions and that are indeed solution oriented and don't get bogged down in ideology or dragged from one side to the other by politics. Easier said than done, but there are a few examples that come to mind. I hope that's useful.
Děkuji paní Edwards za její.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Edwards, for your comment. Mr. Hoření, you addressed young people, young adults, and housing policies in your recent research. Can you share with us what problems they have in the Czech context? Thank you. I think we have one interesting question here, and that's the politicization or depoliticization of housing. And whether we can talk about that from an unbiased, objective view, or what is the extent of normative assessment or qualitative assessment. When we conducted research among young adults aged 25 to 34 from major towns in the Czech Republic, Brno, Olomouc, Pardubice, and so on. And they assessed their situation in a very different way. In general, their feeling is that the situation is unprecedented and that housing is not affordable to them or to their generation, and that the problem affects them. At the same time, they feel that at a personal level, they can cope with that, that they are mobilized, that they can use funds in the family, or that they have friends or acquaintances that can provide to them affordable housing. But they feel that public authorities should intervene. They say it is necessary to do something about that. It is not right. However, their idea of housing is meritocratic, meaning one should deserve to have somewhere to live. In context of labor or in context of employment, I work and therefore I deserve to live somewhere. So that is their perception. So it's quite biased, emotionally biased, and you cannot think about that only just technically. And in terms of the applied research project, when we talk about representatives of the chief architect's office, they ask, what is the ideal mix of housing? If we want to build a new residential area or a new residential district, what is the ideal share of social housing or participative housing? But this question is rather political. We can offer some scenarios from the expert's point of view, but at the end of the day, it is a political decision whom I'm going to prefer, whether young adults or families with children or the elderly. By that, I want to say that there are certain contradictions in the evaluations at the individual level, at the level of institutions, public institutions. And again, let me repeat what has already been said. The continuity, political continuity, might be instrumental in that. At the same time, conserving or preserving one state or status and key policy documents such as housing policy or housing guidelines in the Czech Republic that starts by the recitals where the role of the individual is enshrined. I think that a certain dynamics would be desirable. So this is another contradiction. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tomáš Hoření, Samec. Let me ask Mr. Klusáček. You are an expert of the Zabydlení initiative, so for the housing initiative for the housing or to promote housing. So I think it's not necessary or it's useless to ask such a question. But in your view, what should a public housing policy look like? Just in 2 minutes, please. No, not the entire answer. And what Mr. Dolínek has said, do you think it is the right way, or is there something essential missing? Public policy, as we heard in the presentation, must be a very wide-ranging. It must reflect mobility and the development of rural areas. By that, I'm answering the question whether it goes in the right direction. At the EU level, it is a tool that is applied, but it is only one of the tools. It is not a solution that is sufficient. We have heard from Bratislava that the role of individual towns and cities is essential. It is not necessary for the companies to implement it all. It is vital, however, that the mix of investment-based approaches is adopted, like we have seen in Austria, based on what we have studied. Housing issues are not only related to affordability or unaffordability, but also to the extent to which it is disproportionate, rural areas and urban areas. And as for the housing deprivation, it is vital, what I have already said in my first contribution, to enable housing for people in need. Measures aimed at promoting housing, it takes time, and we need to have some short-term solutions. And one thing that hasn't been said, in big cities, Prague and Brno in the Czech Republic, we have to accept that there will be more people in rental housing from the younger generations. This is coming close to other European countries. And that implies also to improve, or the improving of conditions in rental housing, both in terms of financial affordability, but also stability of rental housing. For instance, enshrining indefinite lease agreements after a certain period of time. The Czech Republic, in employment law, the Czech Republic or the Czech law doesn't acknowledge the repeating of or the prolonging of indefinite or making definite agreements into indefinite agreements, but in lease agreements, this right is not enshrined. And even if I agree with everything what has been said, with all the options or the combinations of private and public housing or housing based on cooperatives, but I think the majority will be on the private market, and we as public policy should create conditions that enable really stable housing.
Thank you, Jan Klusáček. When we were joining FEPS in this project, we excluded the Czech Republic on purpose because we wanted to find international inspiration that we could import into the Czech Republic. And we will be happy to join other projects where we'll be able to include the Czech Republic. I have a question for Petr Dolínek. You were also in politics representing Prague. So an obvious question, is housing in Prague a right? Does anyone have a right to live in Prague? Is it something that should be provided by the state because the person lives in Prague or works in Prague or their children go to school in Prague? Is it something which should be discussed in politics? We will have communal elections in a year, definitely. But it's not a free right. It's not a gift. But the right to live in your city is a right. But we should create the right conditions for this. My colleague spoke about Bratislava, so let me add something about Prague. Now the situation is improving, but in previous years there was a huge issues. We've wasted many opportunities to build housing. The new metro line is now being discussed, but it was all in chaos and the project was just publicized. And when it became public, developers just became interested in it, and they all wanted to invest in it. And it was not about public housing, but it was about mismanagement of urban planning. And it enabled the valuation of property of private owners. So many opportunities have been wasted. So it's not only about brownfields, but also about new opportunities. And some years ago, we didn't think about these lands and we didn't think they could be used for comfortable housing. Another thing which comes to my mind is mobility of people living in social housing. In the Czech Republic, if someone lives in social housing, this person is afraid to leave the city because it means going through the approval process again. And the claim is not automatic. It doesn't mean that if you live in social housing in one city, you will be able to live in social housing in another city. But this should be allowed because people should be able to focus on their families and should not be worried about housing when they decide to move. Thank you, Petr Dolínek, and I'd like to ask the authors and co-authors of the study for their concluding words. First, Nuria Lambealop and then Sergio Nasare Aznar. What would you add to this discussion within the Czech and Slovak context? And what would you like to point out as recommendations for Czech and Slovak policymakers? Nuria Lambealop, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, Patrick, we will do the other way around. I will go with some details first, and then Nuria will do some concluding remarks. Is that okay? Okay, that's great. Thank you. So first of all, okay, thank you. First of all, thank you to all the colleagues for all your valuable comments. I have taken note of all your ideas and suggestions. Thank you to Jan, Sorcha, Thomas, Lucia, and Peter for all of them. I start with Jan's remarks. First, yes, the report tries to cover the problem of housing affordability for all range of households. And of course, housing deprivation and homeless people are also included there, although we couldn't focus precisely on this because, we wanted to keep it a bit narrow and focused. Anyway, I share with you here in the chat. I don't know if you can make it available for the audience that is in Facebook and the other places here. One report we published in 2016. It's a report for the European Commission about the prevention, tackling, and reacting to evictions and homelessness. Maybe you are familiar already with it, but maybe someone from all the audience is not. So yeah, just share the link. Is that you can download. And also, I wanted to share with you another one. This was promoted last year by Housing Europe precisely and FEANSA about the 50 out-of-the-box innovative solutions for the locked out for vulnerable people. There are 50 inspiring cases of all over Europe that include solutions, particular solutions that are working, that are really working, that are reality for people that are really left out. Yeah. So these are. You can download also the report from there. It's a good thing. Another thing to mention is that 0.5 million people in the Czech Republic are households are over indebted. They are using more than 40% of their earnings in housing expenses. It's a real problem. This problem exists all over Europe. But we have to bear in mind that Northern European countries have also this problem, and it's bigger than ours. Be careful also in finding examples in Northern European countries and good practices, because they are worse than we are. This is the case, for example, of 21% of Danish households in cities. 19% of Swiss households in Swiss cities, 16% of Germans, 16% of British, 15% of Luxembourgeois, for 15% of Norwegians. So these are Eurostat data. These are the number of households over indebted in other European countries. They are even worse than we are. So yeah, we have to be to be careful. To be concerned about our problem in our country. Of course, we have to find solutions for our families and so on. But be careful in finding good practices and solutions in other European countries, because they are worse than we are, in a worse situation than we are. Another thing is that you mentioned. Is yes, I agree with you. I fully agree with you. A public policy, a public law should include a wide range of many things of housing things. Housing is, it's a cross-sectional topic. It covers, it affects so many fields that it's so difficult to attain, to ascertain all the details and everything. It has so many impacts in many fields. So first, if you want to start with a housing law for your country, first thing is to agree on concepts. This is what our legislation in Spain, this draft legislation in Spain, starts with, in a wrong way, in my opinion, but at least they have agreed that we have to start with concepts. What is housing? What is a dwelling? What is a permanent residence? This is an essential definition, because on the top of this concept, then you can build policies. But first you have to agree what means what is housing, what is a dwelling. Yes, and this is not easy because, as you well know, because you are sociologists, you're an expert, you're working in an NGO, you have the architectural and the infrastructural part of the house, and you have the X factor, you have the moral factor. This is a thing that links families, households with the structure. And this, for example, this has not been included in the Spanish definition. This is wrong, because you have to include both sides of the story. Otherwise, you end up with a definition of a house like a garage or an office, and this is not the same thing. Yes. So first thing is concepts of first residence dwelling. What is substandard housing? If you want to do policies for homelessness, for inadequate housing, you need a definition for that. And what is homelessness? Homelessness following ethos table. There are few countries. I am not aware of any country, in fact, that really covers the 13 situations of homelessness acknowledged by FEANSA, for example. Countries, usually, especially Northern Europeans, are ashamed of acknowledging publicly that there are so many citizens of their countries that are wrongly dwelled, are not properly dwelled, and this is a complete disaster. But we have to go to you are in an NGO, so you have to fight strong to include a definition of homelessness that includes all situations of precarious accommodation, that includes the ethos table by FEANSA, for example. And yes, I agree with you. And again, so there is a need. The countries where tenancies work have a regulation for indefinite leases, so open-ended leases. Yes, and this, in our opinion, after this 10 law project I mentioned before, should be combined with more flexible leases. So then you can cover two types of needs. One need for those households that cannot afford buying or even are happy being as tenants, but need a stability. And these are the ones you are thinking on. And then you need another type of tenancy, a regulated tenancy that is flexible for, liberal professionals that move around the country or go in foreign countries and so on and so forth and need temporal accommodation. Yeah, this is a sort of that. This is one of the conclusions of the Tenlo project, for example. And then with Sorcha, of course, I agree with everything that Sorcha has mentioned. In relation to governance, particularly in the field of governance, you remember, Sorcha, this report on housing policies. I put the name here, the full name of the report, here in the chat, and maybe you can share, I don't know, the moderator can share with the audience. This report on housing policies in the European Union, made by the German Ministry of Interior, that was presented last year during the pandemic, and I think they are finalizing it and they are about to publish it. It's not public yet, as far as I know, but there are many issues in relation to governance, and this is a thing that some of you have mentioned. The need for coordination of multi-level administrations, and there in this report, because I took part in it, there is a nice chart showing which are the countries that really have succeeded in having, for example, a Ministry of Housing. Yes, and those countries that, for example, have succeeded in having a coordinated multi-level policy of housing. There are some charts on that. We work quite hard to have inputs on that. And we have some examples. So as soon as this is, there is a short summary in this report, in the report we are commenting now. There is a short summary of this report here. I got the permit by the German government to quote the report and to extract some issues, but it's not complete. There are not all countries are here. But in the final report of the German ministry, there's the final report on that. In relation to Thomas' considerations, I fully agree that you need a rental housing, social housing stock to do housing policies. Otherwise, it's very complicated. You can do housing policies without this using how I will say, using classical laws, like for example, civil code, the civil law, or so the law of leases, or condominium law, or law of consumers. You can approach housing policies through these sectional laws, but it's hard to attain all range of needs. So following the rules of these classical laws, for sure you will leave apart the most vulnerable. That's why you need. That's why I agree with you that you need a sufficient social rental social housing stock to these policies. If it is hard to achieve, I have learned today by Peter that it's different in several Czech cities. So in Prague, there is a dramatic situation, and he has mentioned another middle-sized city ruled by the Social Democrats that has a sufficient housing stock. That's quite interesting. But in cities where you have these problems, maybe you can try a soft approach to private stakeholders and make some complicities and agreements to achieve this. For example, in the report, there are some practices mentioned in my region, in Catalonia, and in some other countries that are, for example, using public guarantees to undertake renovations in private homes, or to socially rent out private properties. So you can build up stocks of private housing that by one reason or another have an intervention of public guarantees or public money for refurbishment and so on. And then you can demand in exchange a social compromise, a social involvement of the property, and rent it out, let us say, socially for 5 years, 7 years. Yes, in exchange of this public aid or public backing. Yeah? So it's a quid pro quo. So, of course, they are private stakeholders. Of course, they take out the calculator and they make the calculation and say, okay, it's okay for me or not. But then it is a matter also of social responsibility. You have to talk in those terms, saying you have a social responsibility. There is a drama. We have, you have mentioned the young people as well. I think it was Thomas. The young people. We have young people that are left apart. This is not reasonable, and you are part of the solution. We are offering you a quid pro quo. We are offering you a public backing. We are public money, public aid. In exchange, we need your property for 5 years, 7 years to socially rent out for young people. These are schemes that are working very well in our country, and they are working very well in countries that they are introducing this kind of schemes. They are soft schemes. They are not intrusive. You don't anger private developers and so on and so forth. It's a matter of talking. It's not fast, but they work. Another soft approach for Thomas' concerns would be what we did in 2012. At that time, at municipal level, social services department of municipalities and urban department of municipalities didn't speak to each other. They designed the cities with nice pictures and draws. So you go here, a nice supermarket, here a nice shopping center, here a nice promenade, here. But they didn't talk about people. And social services always say, oh, we have poor people, we have locked out, we have people in need, we have homeless, we have, So for the first time in 2012, because of the huge crisis we experienced here, they started to talk. And now they have hybrid commissions, hybrid meetings. In some municipalities even, we have created housing departments, specific housing departments, and they take care of these issues. So this is a good soft way to go forth. And finally, since 2019, more or less in Spain, we have come up with local housing plans. I don't know if you have this in your country, but they are very useful if they are well done. In my institute, we are developing local housing plans, which means we are analyzing the situation of a given municipality and understanding the situation, which are the problems. The problems is about refurbishment of old housing stock. It's about the elderly. It's about the young people. It's about communications. What is all about. And once we understand the whole municipality with objective data and also with interviews and so on and so forth, we make recommendations. For our city, for example, our city is only 120,000 inhabitants, so it's a middle-sized city for Spanish standard. We made 84 recommendations of all sorts for all kinds of households, specific ones. Talking not only including the advantages and the nice things and the idealistic things, but also the realistic things. This is costly. This you have to put efforts on that. This is not fast, but should be started now to get some results in 5 years' time. These kind of things. It cost us, for example, 1 year to do a proper local housing plan, but it works. It's working because the mayor and the policymakers at municipality level have a tool somewhere to say, okay, these people in academia says we have to do all this range of things. We don't have money and time or people to do all this at the same time, but we can prioritize. We'll see which is the most important thing, which are the resources we have. And we can choose from a menu of options and see what to do. And they have the excuse. Sorcha was mentioning, we need to make housing non-political, cross-party issue. Then, if there is a work from academia specific for your municipality, that is good, because they can go to the opposition, to the other party and say, okay, you see, it's not my idea, it's not my voters thing, it's my whatever. It is what academia says we need in our municipality. We follow this path. And this is working. You need also, for this, of course, you need sort of policy, sort of legislation saying municipalities can do this local, can start these local housing plans, and they are good for this and this and this. For example, one of the outcomes which is free and is working in every municipality is the creation of housing tables, including all stakeholders that work with housing in a given municipality. They meet there once a year and they discuss big issues, big lines. Do we have a problem of squatters? Where are the squatters? Do we have a problem of lack of universal accessibility of elderly people that are locked down in their homes? They cannot go out because of the barriers. Okay, where is it? In which street? Which is the problem on that? What do you need for solving that? And these are the things that are coming up in these meetings, and then they can go on. Sorry, I think I am okay. And then I don't know if it is useful what I am mentioning now. It's useful. Do I have 2 more minutes to cover all the other speakers, the other colleagues? Okay, one minute. And Thomas, again, very interesting your work on the youth of young people and the problems they have. I think some keys for that are the intermediate tenures, so the diversification of housing tenures. This is essential for the young people. To make housing more affordable, you need more types of housing tenures, cooperatives as well, shared ownership, these kind of things, and also the mixité. So once your urban plans require mixité, which means you cannot make neighborhoods just for the elderly, just for families with children, just for young people. You need mixité. You need a diversity neighborhood. Then you can. You can go for mixité. This is the idea, to mix up different types of households. This is where the richness is. And in relation to Lucia, problem of land scarcity to develop housing is related to the protection of the environment, is relation to the protection of the historical heritage, and so on and so forth. Urban sprawl is also a problem. So the liberalization of land is neither a solution. We already experienced that in Spain since 1998. And it didn't work because it started speculation, it started to destroy the landscape, urban sprawl, and so on and so forth. So yeah, a balance is needed to find between the availability of land and the protection of environment and preventing urban sprawl and this kind of thing. And I agree, it's not easy. And finally, in relation to Peter, Yeah, for example, he mentioned these Airbnb problems, I presume in Prague particularly. I can understand this, but I have had a look on one of the works with it, and I have seen that Prague is one of the most liberal cities in Europe in relation to Airbnb and touristification. At least it was 2 years ago, together with Milan, Copenhagen, Denver in Arizona. But be careful. Not everything is black or white. You are now in the black. You see, you are in the more liberal situation, but you don't need to go like Berlin, for example, or Anaheim or New York in the United States. Yeah, these are the white, the completely opposite. Yes, there is a wide range of gray colors, gray tones. For example, we can go for the system in Paris, in Amsterdam, in London, or San Francisco, which is quite near to yours, but there is a sort of control, soft control. And also you can go for the Barcelona, New Orleans, Portland, Chicago model. This is another model, which is more, which is stronger. Of course, it is not easy. Again, there are no magical formula for housing things or Airbnb things. There are many gray areas there, but you can work on that. And yes, of course, again, quality legislation is crucial. We have also experienced in our country, and there are some also other reports from other countries in the final report saying that continuity, again, I agree, is essential, and the quality of legislation is essential. In our case, for example, tenancies have been a complete disaster because the law has been changed each 3-4 years. Neither tenants nor landlords know what they have to do, whether they are rights and obligations. It's a chaos, it's a complete chaos. So you need a good quality of legislation. And thank you. These were my remarks, and maybe Nuria has 2 sentences to summing up something. Nuria?
Yes, thank you, Sergio. Just to conclude, no, I think from what we all have said today, I think it's clear that there's a need to count on a wide range of policies to tackle the different and complex dimensions of the housing affordability and sustainability. And because housing in the end is across, as Sergio said, has a cross impact in many fields: economics, health, human rights, education, energy, social cohesion, and so on. So with our recommendations, we try to acknowledge also the diverse housing situations in European countries, in European regions, in European cities, which of course have different housing systems due to their long-term approaches to housing, based on a mix and market solutions and state intervention. And so different situations, but we did the same time, and we have seen it here today, we face similar and also sometimes new challenges on housing policy. So that's why our recommendations include not only revising some concepts, but having a full database on housing matters. We focus also on research, integrated strategies at the EU level. We talked about funding for new stocks and renovation, also assessing that funding, different types of coordination and networking. We also have mentioned it here today to ensure mechanisms of exchange also of information and knowledge, what has been done correctly, incorrectly, what can be changed, etc. So, and to leave it to the final sentence, I think we have also to insist not only on short term, but also on long-term strategies that we have highlighted, and including, of course, all kind of stakeholders in the housing field. So public, private for-profit, private non-for-profit. So no one should be left behind because of the multidimensionality and complexity of the field, of housing field. Thank you.
Já děkuji moc. Jsme závěrečné.
Thank you very much. So to conclude, I'd like to thank Sorcha Edwards, Lucia Štaselová, Tomáš Hoření Samec, Jan Klusáček, Petr Dolínek, Nuria Lambealop, Sergio Nasare Aznar. Thank you very much for your contributions, for the dialogue. Thanks to this dialogue, we were maybe able to put our experience into words, our experience from various countries. I'd like to thank our interpreters as well, because we were able to understand each other thanks to them. And I'd like to thank all those who watched from the Czech Republic, Slovakia, or other countries. And hopefully we will see you at one of the future events, and hopefully we will see each other in person. So this was our last event this year. Read our publications, follow our social media of our Masaryk Academy, and also follow social media of FEPS, and enjoy the end of the year. Thank you for coming and joining us.